Hello and welcome along to the Match Champions League special as Real Madrid are preparing for the biggest game in this season's group stages. The Whites taking on Juventus at the Santiago Bernabeu on Wednesday evening. With me as ever to preview the game, Sid Lowe. And Sid, games like this are what the Champions League's all about.
Yeah, and it obviously when it really gets down to the excitement is when it's in the knockout phases. But certainly it's games like this I think that help to keep the group stage alive, because there's always a risk, particularly when you're a seed as Real Madrid are, of the risk of having a couple of games in the group stage that people don't get hugely excited about. But Juventus mean an awful lot to Real Madrid fans because the history has overlapped on so many occasions, in particular with that 7th European Cup 32 years later that Real Madrid won. And I think that means that this will be huge.
Things looking good for Real Madrid at the moment. A very good 2-0 victory over Malaga at the weekend, an impressive performance. And now with the squad, Carlo Ancelotti's called up 22 players. Everybody's pretty much available apart from Xabi Alonso. Yeah,
and Alonso, as Ancelotti said today, will be ready in around about a fortnight, 10 or 15 days he thinks it will be before Alonso's fully fit. I think Real Madrid have done reasonably well at replacing him while he's been away, but there is still that question mark, and I think until the weekend against Malaga, perhaps Madrid hadn't controlled games as they would have expected to with Alonso on the side. But bit by bit, I think we're seeing better performances from Mendy in particular, who's really grown into that role in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And of course, Modric has had 2 or 3 really good games, a couple of less good ones. But I think that's important for Madrid, and we've talked about this before, but I think there's a significance to the Alonso injury, which could even be good news for Real Madrid, which is the fact that it's happened now. Because in the last couple of seasons, he's reached April, May time in not great physical shape. And it may well be, obviously time will tell, but it may well be that being injured now in September, October, perhaps that will mean that he's that little bit fresher when it comes around to those moments where the season really becomes defined.
This week, Carlo Ancelotti has had his whole squad available at training for the first time since he's taken over. That's hugely significant.
Yeah, and that's fundamentally based on obviously Gareth Bale, who came off the back of not having a really good pre-season, so he's been in and out of the squad, and Xabi Alonso. Those long-term injuries are the main reason for that. But the other 2 significant injuries were the 2 left-backs at the same time, when both Coentrao and Marcelo were out for around about 3 weeks, 2.5, 3 weeks. So Ancelotti clearly will be very, very pleased to have all of those players. I think, though, that he will also be making decisions partly based on physical fitness, particularly in the case of his decision over whether or not he starts with Angel Di Maria or Gareth Bale, and I suspect it will be Angel Di Maria, at least to start with.
That victory over Malaga at the weekend, 2-0, not necessarily the most convincing scoreline, but the performance overall was excellent.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because we've looked at a Madrid side that, OK, they were beaten by Atletico Madrid, but have largely had pretty good results in La Liga. Not so good as to be right at the very, very top, but good enough. What hasn't always accompanied those results has been the performances. So you think, for example, about the performance away in Granada in particular, which really stands out. And I think that it's important that Madrid don't just win games, but they play well, and they get that sense of conviction, and particularly that sense of identity about them, because I think until now we've had doubts over exactly how they're approaching games, and bit by bit I think it's starting to fall into place.
The performances in the Champions League, though, have been hugely impressive. 10 goals, 6 points, 2 wins from 2.
Yeah, and in a position where they genuinely could find themselves already mathematically through after just the 3rd game, which I believe, and I'm prepared to be corrected on this, but I believe it would be the first time that a club had done that, had been mathematically through after only 3 games. It depends on what happens in the other match between Copenhagen and Galatasaray, but it could happen this time round.
Have you been surprised by how Real Madrid have started the Champions League?
Well, I mean, I'm surprised in the sense that you don't expect to go to Turkey and score 6 times.
Well, they've never won in Istanbul before.
Yeah, so surprised in that sense, but surprised in the sense that Madrid have picked up 2 wins in the first 2 games and they've looked very comfortable. No, not really. Obviously, the home game against Copenhagen, I think we expected them to play well. So much so that we actually got the prediction right on the show. And I think
that's very generous. You say we, it was you.
Well, OK, but you know, I think we both expected them to score 3, 4, maybe even 5 goals. But you're right. The surprise comes with this result that we're seeing here against Galatasaray. And actually, in truth, it took a while, didn't it, against Galatasaray? Madrid had started a little sluggishly. Once Isco got the goal, it really opened things up, and it enabled it more like obliged Galatasaray to come forward, and that enabled Madrid to play on the counter-attack. And I think even though this was a side still finding its identity in terms of how it wants to approach games, I think we know that because of the players they've got, and perhaps even more so once Gareth Bale comes into the team, this is a side that on the break are going to be pretty much better than anyone in Europe. The question mark is how many sides will allow them to play on the break.
There might perhaps have been a little bit of frustration amongst Real Madrid fans seeing them put in these wonderful performances in the Champions League and then domestically not quite living up to that expectation.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that, but I think there are a couple of reasons why it's not as big a problem as it may appear. One is the fact that the Champions League is very much the trophy that Real Madrid considered to be their own, and that long wait for 10 years is the thing that's starting to obsess everybody, which is natural because it's the kind of the defining trophy for the club. And the other is that fact that I think the fans are aware that there is a difference between domestic competition and European competition. There's a difference between the level of the clubs in Spain and, for example, Copenhagen, maybe less so Galatasaray. So I think they would have accepted that.
Well, let's hear from the Real Madrid camp. Cristiano Ronaldo has been speaking at the pre-match press conference.
Todavía tenemos 6 puntos. 6 puntos no se cualifica nadie. Por eso que...
We have 6 points and nobody qualifies with just 6 points. So that's why we have to try and win every game. Playing against Juventus is a great thing for this club because it's a big game which every player wants to play in. And in my opinion, the players are just focusing on this match because it's the most important game. The next game is always the most important. We have to win as always. We are playing at home. We're expecting a strong Juve side. We know they will be hurting a bit from their last game, which they lost 4-2, but that doesn't stop them from being a great side. A team with lots of experience and maturity. So we have to play well, play our own game with intensity and focus, because that's the only way we are going to win. And that's what we want to do, because if we win, we'll have 9 points and we'll be on our way to qualifying.
Cristiano Ronaldo speaking at the pre-match press conference. It was a very assured press conference from Cristiano Ronaldo. Right, let's take a look at who Sid thinks is going to be featuring for Real Madrid against the Italian champions. Sid?
Yeah, and perhaps the only really significant doubt. I mean, we've had doubts in the middle of midfield throughout the season, whether it's a combination of 3 or 4 players, Khedira, Modric, Iadamendi, Isco, and, of course, in theory at least, Casemiro, although despite that good pre-season, he hasn't really featured competitively. I think we'll see Khedira to give them that little bit of strength. I've gone for Modric, although Iadamendi has been performing better. The only really big doubt would be whether or not Gareth Bale starts on the right-hand side. And I must confess, I think it's a bit early. And I think Real Madrid are being very cautious because, of course, he's had that problem of not having really had a pre-season training. I think the 2 games that he's had to pull out of through injury have imposed caution on Real Madrid. And let's not forget the fact that there's a Clasico at the weekend. So I think Ancelotti will be very cautious. There's also one other reason not to rush Gareth Bale, and it's a very simple one. Angel Di Maria is playing quite well, so you don't really... I mean, obviously, long-term, Bale will play a very, very big part for Real Madrid, but short-term, perhaps you don't just need him, at least not just yet.
Right, well, that's all we've got time for on this edition of The Match. Don't forget you can get involved in the programme on Twitter. You can tweet us using the hashtag TheMatchRM. But from Sid and myself, that's all we've got time for. Adios.